I was groomed to be the Walpole family's daughter-in-law since childhood. At 20, I married Emond Walpole. At 24, I gave birth to Will Walpole. Will is very much like Emond, always quiet and distant, not very close to me. Every night in the past, I would bring a cup of warm milk to them before bed. But this day, Emond accidentally knocked over the cup, and Will secretly poured out the milk. I suddenly felt a bit tired. The moment I handed the divorce papers to Emond, he frowned in displeasure and asked me, "You want a divorce just because of this?" "Yes, just because of this." Ding! This novel reminds you to click the subscribe button in the bottom right corner to read the complete novel. What about our son? What do you plan to do about Will? Emond returned to his usual expressionless self, asking me in a businesslike manner. I sat across from him, feeling like a guest at his negotiation table, and calmly replied, "I will give up my custody rights. The house in the east suburb will also be transferred to his name as compensation for child support. After all, this child has the Walpole surname. Compared to being with me, he and Emond truly seem like a family." Emond looked down at me, his emotions flat, as if he didn't understand what I was upset about. "Livia," he softened his tone. "If it's because of that glass of milk that's bothering you, I apologize. You know, I was drunk last night. I didn't mean to treat you that way," he patiently explained, still believing it was all about that glass of milk. Last night, Emond returned home very late after socializing. I waited for him half the night, only waking up when the cold air he brought in hit me. I got up from the sofa and saw him struggling to remove his coat, pressing his forehead in discomfort. I immediately went to the kitchen and brought him the warm milk that had been sitting there for a while. In the past, while our marriage wasn't exactly perfect, we managed to maintain appearances. But last night, I asked one more question. "Did you meet someone? The perfume on you smells familiar." Emond suddenly let go of the milk I handed him. I didn't react in time, and the glass slipped from our fingers, shattering the peaceful light in the room. Emond's brows furrowed, his aura tense and irritated. He looked at me coldly, warning me, "Livia Hurley, you've crossed a line. You don't have to wait for me at night anymore, and you don't need to prepare milk for me." And my son Will, after seeing his father's reaction, secretly poured the milk down the sink. When I caught him, he stood at the door, equally emotionless, apologizing to me. "I'm sorry, Mom. Dad doesn't want it, and I don't want it either." To them, it seemed like such a trivial matter. I shouldn't, and couldn't, make such a big fuss over it. I didn't explain much further. I signed the divorce agreement and entrusted a good lawyer. I chose to end my marriage with Emond Walpole. Emond casually mentioned many things about the division of assets. I didn't really listen and wasn't too concerned. I went back to my room to pack my things. He lowered his gaze to examine me. "Livia, the paperwork will take some time, you don't need to rush to move out. This apartment can also be left for you." I glanced at the still steady and indifferent man. Calmly, I replied with his own words, "It's better to handle things neatly and cleanly to avoid leaving behind problems." Emond didn't say anything further. I never thought packing my luggage would be such a daunting task. The room was filled with trivial items, each piece had been arranged by my own hands. I scanned the space and finally decided to keep it simple, dragging my suitcase toward the door. Emond blocked my way. "Where are you planning to go? To your parents' house? I'll have the driver take you." "No need," I refused and told him. "Remember to have the housekeeper clear out my things tomorrow, I won't handle it." After all, they didn't need one more person to help. As I stepped out the door, I thought for a moment. I turned back and addressed Will, who had been standing behind Emond with an expressionless face. "I won't be picking you up from kindergarten anymore, but remember not to go with strangers." I suppose that was my final explanation to myself. After saying that, I turned and left. I didn't look back at the child who once cried during weaning, whom I had patiently cradled through the night. I bought a plane ticket leaving North City. I randomly chose a city in the south. Since I was told at 14 that I would marry into the Walpole family, my freedom and choices have been restricted. Later, I married Emond, and aside from attending some necessary events, he never took the initiative to take me out for a walk. The most common routine in my life is probably waiting for him and our son to come home every night, and before bed, I prepare a warm glass of milk for them. People in our circle say that Walpole's mother has trained me well, perfectly crafted to be Emond's wife. I match his status and take care of his life. The only flaw is, I was too perfect. Perfect to the point of being a bit dull, seeming somewhat stiff. I once heard Emond's friends tease him. "Emond, what's it like to live like an old married couple at such a young age? Your wife is so boring, she smiles like a mannequin. Want us to introduce you to someone interesting?" Just the other day, Colin met a funny girl, really amusing, just like Mary Cowie back in the day. What do you think? Interested? Mary Cowie, Emond's first love. Back then, Emond's mother disapproved of their relationship, and Emond resisted in every way. Later, I don't know what happened. They broke up, and Mary went to France. Then, when he was 20, Emond suddenly accepted the Walpole family's arrangements and actively proposed to me. 4 years later, I gave birth to Will Walpole. Oh, right, I remembered. That night, the familiar scent of perfume I smelled on Emond was the same one Mary loved to use. A special gardenia fragrance. After finding a good place to stay in the South City, I wandered around many places. The fine rain of South City and the hazy alleys made me feel endlessly delighted. Unexpectedly, on the morning of the third day, I suddenly received a call from Emond. He seemed to have just gotten out of bed, his voice hoarse as he asked me, "Livia, where did you put the pair of ruby cufflinks you bought for me at last year's auction?" I paused. "They're in the drawer of the second shelf in the cloakroom." I asked him again, "What's the occasion?" Emond replied, "A ribbon-cutting ceremony for a mall." I said, "The matching suit is the fourth item in the second row." Emond seemed still half asleep, and I could hear him rummaging around on the other end, faintly complaining. After listening for a while, I asked him, "Did you find them?" There was silence on the other end, as if he had finally reacted. "I found them. Sorry, I didn't mean to trouble you." I responded with a and said, "I know." I instructed him, "Have the housekeeper tidy up your place again. If you still can't find anything, you can ask them. From now on, don't call me to trouble me again." Emond was silent for a moment and said, "Okay." After hanging up, I blocked his number and fell back into a restless sleep. But this sleep was anything but sound. I had many bizarre dreams. There was laughter and play with classmates when I was 14. There was the sunny day when I first met Emond at 15. There was the pain of being caught by my dad and having my legs broken when I sneaked out to play racing at 16. And another jarring ringtone interrupted me. I suddenly woke from the dream, irritated as I reached for my phone by the bed. It was an unfamiliar number. I pressed to answer, and a polite voice came through, "Hello, is this Will Walpole's mom? I'm Will's kindergarten teacher. The thing is, we're having a robot exhibition today, and Will is participating, but he didn't bring his project. He said that his mom prepared it for him. Would you be able to bring it to him?" The teacher was very enthusiastic. I tightened my grip on the phone, closed my eyes briefly, feeling an indescribable fatigue. Not long ago, I was sitting in the living room, studying the video diagrams frame by frame, helping Will with his craft project. But that day, I left too hurriedly, and the robot was still a half-finished product. I looked out at the bright sun already high in the sky and softly replied to the teacher. "Sorry, teacher, Will's custody no longer belongs to me, and I won't be taking care of him anymore." "And, is he with you right now?" "Ah," the teacher sounded a bit awkward. Yes, Will is right next to me." I sighed. "Could you please put him on speaker?" "Okay, sure. Thank you." I heard the sound of the phone shifting, followed by silence. I thought Will could hear me. I spoke softly, "Will, the robot is in the toy box in your room. You can call your dad to bring it over, or ask anyone else to deliver it, but from now on, I hope you won't call me again. I won't come to see you, nor will I help you with your crafts. You know, I'm no longer your mom." After saying that, I apologized to the teacher again and hung up the phone. It is really sad to say these words to the child that you gave birth to with half your life. I can't remember when it was that Will started to resemble Emond more and more. My engagement with Emond was arranged long ago. When I was 14, my grandfather and father walked out of the study with smiles, accompanied by the elders of the Walpole family. From that day on, I was treated as a daughter-in-law by the Walpole family. In school, many classmates envied my wealthy background. I didn't argue, I could only smile bitterly. My life was comfortable, yet I had no freedom. During the high school entrance exam, I didn't do well. In the middle of the night, my mom grew increasingly angry, believing I had embarrassed her. She barged into my room, pulled me up, and slapped my face. In high school, I rebelled and fell in love early, and my dad added another slap. He warned me that if I didn't want to marry into the Walpole family, I would have to marry someone else who was almost 20 years older than me, other entrepreneurs. The first time I met Emond was when I was 15, arranged by both families. At that time, Emond was different from now. He was a cheerful boy, easily showing his emotions. I didn't have a deep impression of him. I only remembered the white shirt against the blue sky and a pair of expressive eyes. Later, I heard he had a cold war with his family over his first love. I admired and envied him. At least he had the courage to resist, he had the right to refuse. But not long after, Mrs. Walpole came to visit my family. With a polite smile tinged with apology, she took my mother's hand and said, "Don't worry, the matter with Emond has been resolved." I listened from the doorway, feeling quite disappointed. I thought, as expected. After that, my family began arranging more meetings between me and Emond. At first, he was quite resistant and didn't show me any kindness. Gradually, he accepted it and would occasionally speak a few words with me. I watched him transform from a prickly boy into someone increasingly silent, suppressing all his emotions. The unique fragrance of gardenias he carried also faded into the air over time. Until I turned 20, that year when Emond was 24. On our way to a party in City C, we unexpectedly encountered a landslide and were trapped in the car. Emond and I were buried for a day and a night. When rescuers found us, my last memory was of his arm, shielding me, being pierced by the crushed car, blood and flesh everywhere. After I woke up, he proposed to me. In front of my family and the Walpole family, he asked me, "Livia Hurley, will you be my wife?" At that moment, I looked at his arm, wrapped in white bandages. I remembered being trapped in the car, him anxiously calling my name, saying, "Livia, don't sleep. If you fall asleep now, you really won't be free." I, almost instinctively, placed my hand in his palm. I overlooked the calmness in his lowered eyes, as if he were completing a necessary ritual. So we got married. For years later, just as everyone wished, we had a child. Will was showered with love from both families as soon as he was born. Mrs. Walpole believed he needed the best elite education, just like Emond. So Will spilled that cup of milk, and with the same innocent face as his father, he apologized to me while doing what he thought was perfectly natural. I didn't know what the father and son were thinking. But it had only been a week, I received a call from Emond again. He used a different number. Because I had blocked him. This back and forth wasn't something Emond Walpole would do. When the call connected, there was silence on the other end for a few seconds. Just as I was feeling puzzled and about to hang up, Emond's voice came through. "Livia," he called my name, "your parents said you haven't returned home. Where have you been? Is it South City?" He was checking up on me. I knew he had that ability. But there was an indescribable anger in my heart. In our 9-year marriage, he was cold, distant, like a passerby sharing the same roof with me. Now, in just half a month, the number of calls he made to me exceeded what he had done in the past year. I used to message him. "Are you coming home for dinner tonight? Are you in a meeting? Does your stomach hurt? Do you want me to make some congee for you?" He would reply with a maximum of just, "Okay." Now he acted as if nothing had happened. On the phone, he hoarsely asked me, "Livia, I have a social gathering today, my stomach feels a bit uncomfortable from drinking. Where did you put the medicine at home?" And, Will caught a cold and has a fever from being infected by classmates at kindergarten. He keeps complaining about feeling unwell. What did you usually do to make him feel better? I was filled with rage. I forced myself to suppress my anger, trying not to sound like a hysterical madwoman, and told him word by word. "Emond, we are already divorced. I am no longer your wife, nor your nanny. Whether your stomach hurts or not, or whether you can find the medicine, it has nothing to do with me. Plus, if you just gave a heads up, you wouldn't lack someone to buy you medicine. When a child is sick, there is no point in telling me more. I am not a doctor, and I have never met a father who would ask the mother what to do at such a time. I don't know what you want to achieve, maybe it's reluctance, or maybe you've gotten used to my care. But Emond, I don't want to make this sound too harsh, we are done. Don't disturb my life anymore, do you understand? After saying this, I hung up the phone completely. I flipped my phone over, took out the SIM card, and threw it into the trash can. In today's society, everything is linked to mobile phone cards. I never expected Emond and Will would call me every now and then. Of course, I didn't think this meant Emond still had feelings for me. It was just that I had taken care of them for so long that he was momentarily unaccustomed to my absence. I got a new mobile phone card and withdrew some cash. I signed up for a scientific research team and went on a trip to the Northwest. This was a project I had seen online. At the time, when I mentioned it, Emond said he didn't have time. Friends in our circle laughed and said, "This is too shabby. Livia, with Emond's status, such a cheap tour would be quite embarrassing." I smiled and didn't say anything more. At that moment, I thought it was just a fleeting idea. The Walpole family wouldn't allow me to act so recklessly. I never expected that now, it would be so easy. Once a shackle is broken, the person bound begins to struggle from the bottom of their heart. The day I set off with the research team, the sky was clear. We traveled by train. The train swayed along the entire route, and every time I fell deep into that troubled dream, I would be slowly shaken awake. As dawn broke, everything was chaotic and unclear. The research team was mainly composed of geologists. They looked like they weren't good with words, yet they could talk enthusiastically about a pile of dirt, a blade of grass, or an unknown wildflower. Occasionally humorous, sometimes witty. They filled the vast and sparsely populated Northwest with abundant vitality. Undeniably, my good family background and the years of training from the Walpole family allowed me to see many things that others couldn't access. In the past, I believed that going out to explore was more enjoyable when done with family. But now, hiking in Yadin, camping in the desert, burnt lamb, covered in dust, made me see even brighter stars in the sky. I knew Emond would still check my itinerary, but that no longer mattered. Later, after the research team's itinerary ended, I exchanged contact information with this group of new friends. After a few days in the city, we set out on the Sichuan-Tibet line. At the moment I climbed Mount Komolangma, I suffered from severe altitude sickness. Breathing rapidly, my head felt like it was splitting. I almost thought I would meet my end on this highest mountain. But in the distance, the sun shone on the golden mountain, and everyone at the summit was cheering. In that warm, chaotic atmosphere, I burst into tears. The team members hurriedly helped me with oxygen and gave me high-sugar drinks. Thinking I was too uncomfortable, they quickly comforted me. "Hey, don't cry, girl, it's okay, your blood oxygen level is coming up, don't be afraid, we're here, you won't die. Yeah, Livia, you're still so young, you'll be fine, there's a long way to go, this is just the beginning." I cried uncontrollably, but in the end, they made me laugh through my tears. With their help, I stood up from the snow, facing the distant golden mountain, ready for my new life. No matter how many shackles there are or how difficult the journey, I can still reach the summit alone, can't I? After coming back, I rediscovered some old hobbies. Like extreme sports, like racing. Like raising a little dog that I love. Before I made an engagement with Emond, I was actually a carefree and cheerful person. I loved everything vibrant and full of life. But later, I even lost my own freedom. How could I talk about love? I raised a mixed-breed Maltese, which I named Toby. It has soft caramel-colored fur and innocent big eyes. Every time it runs, its ears flap like a little gas canister. Dogs are easier to get along with than people. Dogs understand your needs better than people do. Dogs never ignore you, they know you love them, and they love you back. And the next time I saw Emond, it was at the entrance of my new home. I was about to go out for a walk with Toby. I opened the door and saw Emond standing at the elevator. Beside him was Will, nervously staring at Toby in my hands. "What are you two doing here?" I asked him coldly while sitting across from Emond. Will was at the end of the sofa, frowning at Toby, who was showing off its food. Emond silently studied me for a moment. "Livia, you've lost weight." I lifted my eyelids. "Don't evade the question." "It's our son who wanted to see you." I couldn't stop him. "Emond," I asked him, "do you remember what I told you last time? We're divorced. Please don't disturb my life anymore." "Do you not understand?" Emond pressed his thin lips into a line. "Livia, Will is still young, he can't be without his mother." I smiled. I called the security guard of the community. I invited this father-son duo to leave. Will was unwilling to go. He stood stubbornly at my doorway, looking at me, opening his mouth as if he wanted to say something. I held Toby and didn't look at him once. I firmly shut the door. I was afraid that if I looked at him again, I would instinctively soften. He is the flesh and blood I brought into this world, lying in the operating room, feeling heart-wrenching pain. I held him, loved him, comforted him, and cared for him. The first word he uttered was "Mommy." When he was little, Will would cry when he saw anyone, but he was quiet and adorable only when he was in my arms. But later, Emond's mother, Mrs. Walpole, said I wasn't raising the child well, so she used so-called elite education to train him. A child's growth is always a reflection of family education. Whatever he hears, he remembers, and whatever he learns, he does. As he grew up, he became reluctant to be close to me. He started to distance himself, treating me with the same formality as Emond. He would call me mother and address me with the utmost respect. "Mother, can you let my dad teach me? Grandma says you don't have as high an education as Dad, so you can't teach me well. Mother, why do you always stay at home? Don't you have any hobbies? My classmates' moms do. Mother, you're too serious, not like Mary Cowie, who always has all sorts of fun and interesting ideas." After I told the guard not to let anyone in carelessly, Emond changed his approach. Sometimes, he would wait for me alone at the entrance of the community in the morning. Sitting in the back seat of his Maybach, it looked like he hadn't slept all night. When he saw me come out, he hurriedly handed me a steaming breakfast. "You don't like to eat in the morning, it's not good for your stomach, so at least have a little." Sometimes he would also bring Will along, waiting for me while I walked my dog. I walked past them without a glance, never looking at them once. The neighbors I met while walking my dog would sometimes curiously ask me about the relationship between me and this striking father-son duo. I honestly told them, my ex-husband, who had another woman in his heart, and my child, who liked that woman more than me. They would immediately feel awkward. Then they would unite against them. Every time they saw the father and son, they would warn me in advance, telling me not to go out yet, as out of sight meant out of mind. I would smile gently and tell them it was fine. I had long since stopped caring about it. Emond was always very busy. There were many matters waiting for him at the company. He couldn't always be here entangled with me. Many times, I saw him sitting tiredly in the car, answering call after call. Perhaps it was about the company. Perhaps it was related to the Walpole family. After all, he had taken Will out for too long. Sometimes, Will would secretly sneak out behind Emond, asking the driver to bring him to find me. Then without a word, he would quietly follow me step by step. I focused on walking Toby. I would give him water and coax him into eating treats. Toby would happily wag his little tail and softly bark woof woof at me. Will stood nearby, watching silently, his eyes filled with anger. Children are less adept at hiding their emotions than adults. Once, Toby ran off quickly, and Will couldn't keep up. He anxiously fell on the stone path. Finally unable to hold back, he cried out, red-eyed and aggrieved, "Mommy, it hurts." Will rarely cried after he understood things. Maybe it was the frustration and hurt in his heart that made him feel so wronged, as he lay on the ground crying to the point of collapse. I quietly watched him, making no move. Until the bodyguards following him rushed over and picked him up from the ground. In the past, Will often got sick, and every time he was unwell, I would feel sick and heartbroken too. But now, my heart was as calm as still water. I could no longer stir up even the slightest ripple. My life now won't be affected by the appearance of the Walpole father and son. After returning from a trip recently, I signed up for a racing club. I thought I'd pick up some old hobbies. I didn't expect to be fortunate enough to qualify for a competition. Even though there's a high chance I'll be eliminated in the first round, I still prepared seriously for a long time. The race is scheduled for a week later. On the day I left, I specifically bought a ticket for a flight at dawn. Nervous pre-race preparations, full of anticipation yet calm. The wind on the track ripped through the blazing sun, time stood still in the friction between the tires and the ground. Sweat under my racing suit chased and pulled urgently. I took off my helmet, dripping with sweat, and stood on the podium as cheers erupted from the audience in waves. Second place. It was a result I had never expected. I walked out with the crowd. Emond was standing in the crowded throng, holding Will's hand. Will was holding a bouquet of flowers. As if afraid the flowers would be damaged by the passerby, he carefully avoided everyone past him. The moment he saw me, Emond nodded, a hint of a smile spreading in his eyes, and spoke one word. From his lips, it seemed to be congratulations. Will, with his cheeks flushed, excitedly waved at me, cheerfully shouting, "Mom, you were amazing!" The surrounding crowd watched us with smiles. I, however, only felt annoyed. Holding my things, I walked outside. Emond approached with Will. "Livia, I didn't know you could do this. Why didn't you mention it before? Mom, you were so cool just now. You have no idea how nervous I was when you passed that car." I pretended not to hear, continuing my pace. Emond held my hand, lowering his voice to ask me gently, "Livia, let's have dinner together tonight to celebrate." Will really wants to see you too. Will listened, eagerly looking at me with hopeful eyes, trying to push the bouquet into my hands. I pulled my hand away, avoiding it. "I'm busy, I don't have time. You can eat by yourselves." Emond was careless at work. Will hadn't been home for a long time. Mrs. Walpole inevitably came to me. I looked at this woman who once liked me and now felt distant, and I felt an indescribable sadness in my heart. Perhaps it was because we were both mothers, or perhaps because we were both women. "Livia, I chose you to be Emond's wife because you are quiet and reserved, a suitable person to be the young mistress of the Walpole family. But now, both Emond and Will are not coming home because of you. What's the difference between you and Mary Cowie back then? Livia, come back. Just do it for my sake, and give Emond another chance." Mrs. Walpole was never the type of aggressive socialite. On the contrary, she always spoke gently and politely. Just like the same way Emond and Will treated me. I thought if it weren't for her son and grandson, she wouldn't have lowered herself to sit in my small 2-bedroom apartment, asking me to give Emond a chance. But Mrs. Walpole, Emond doesn't love me at all. Our marriage has already wasted 9 years of my life. When you chose me, you valued my family, not me. Now I've fulfilled everyone's wishes. Our two families are closely collaborating and cannot be separated. I've also given birth to a child as you hoped. Will has grown up now, and without me, the Walpole family will take good care of him. Can you please give me my freedom back? Once, my dad broke my leg and killed my little dog. I was timid and afraid, unwilling to resist. Later, I married Emond, and their purpose was achieved, and I had Will, whose blood was inseparable from theirs. I had become useless. Most importantly is, Mrs. Walpole, I no longer love Emond. The youthful infatuation began with Livia. If you fall asleep, you will never have freedom again. Would you marry me? Maybe I can give you freedom. But later, the dragon-slaying youth became a dragon himself, forgetting the promises he made casually. Mrs. Walpole sighed deeply, speaking into the air. Did you hear that, Emond? I tried my best. Next to her handbag, the phone screen lit up. It displayed Emond's name, and the call was ongoing. That night, Emond appeared at my door. Livia, I still want to try again. I know I didn't handle things well before, I neglected you. Can you give me a chance to make it up and start over? I quietly looked at him. I think I've made myself clear enough. Emond ran his fingers through his tousled hair in frustration. He always paid attention to his image and rarely looked this disheveled. He wore a charcoal gray suit but had on a pair of blue cufflinks. The color contrast was too jarring. It was a big mistake. In the past, every outfit he wore was coordinated by me. But now, all I could think about was when he would leave. Emond looked at me helplessly. I love you, Livia. It's just that I didn't cherish you before. I've never loved anyone I didn't know how to love, which is why I made you sad. It wasn't until you left that I realized I can't live without you, it's all my fault. Livia, can you give me another chance? Will can't live without you either. He cries every day wanting his mom. No one else can comfort him. Can you please reconsider for the sake of the child? Oh, he said he loved me. He said he had never loved anyone and didn't know how to love. Back when my family arranged for us to meet, he told me, Livia Hurley, I have someone I love in my heart, you know that, right? At that time, he had a very bad relationship with the Walpole family because of Mary Cowie. Later, after we got married, I heard that Mary had a new boyfriend in France, and he got drunk and came home late for the first time. The next day, Mrs. Walpole pressed us on when we would have children, and Emond scoffed, asking Mrs. Walpole to change my perfume to a special gardenia scent. He would agree to have children then. Every place, every time, there was the shadow of Mary Cowie. And yet, he said he had never loved anyone? I looked at him sarcastically. What about Mary? Emond was taken aback, as if finally having some lie exposed, and he lowered his gaze seriously. There's no Mary, Livia, there has never been a Mary in my heart. I didn't want to be controlled by my family back then, I did it on purpose. I've only ever loved you, from the beginning to the end, only you. How ridiculous it is. I used to wonder if Emond was cold and distant towards me because he resented me over his forced breakup with Mary. I know what it feels like to be helpless. But I don't sympathize with him. Later, when Will was born, my feelings for Emond gradually faded. I just numbly and routinely did things befitting a member of the Walpole family. I placed my hopes on Will, looking forward to finally having someone in this family who was connected to me by blood. In those early days, Will became my only solace. But just 2 years later, that hope turned into a thorn embedded in my flesh. Emond might love me, but compared to his face, dignity, and everything else, he was simply used to my care and attention. In our marriage, for whatever reason, he ignored me, treated me coldly, and took it for granted that women should contribute to the family. These are unchangeable facts. No one is incapable of love, and no one truly misunderstands it. Only after losing something do we cherish it, but that's just unwillingness and not having found something better. Loving anything in youth is forgivable, and giving up on something in maturity is not a mistake. Emond Walpole, save yourself some dignity. Emond has always been a proud person, he understood my words. So the last time I saw him was still at my house. A while ago, I went on a trip to the tropical rainforest with a group. It was the rainy season, and I got caught in a few showers. Plus, there were many things to deal with recently. After coming back, I inevitably fell ill. When I woke up feeling miserable, it was Emond who helped me up. Will was lying by the bed, worriedly asking me in a low voice, Mom, how are you feeling? Is there anywhere that feels uncomfortable? How about Dad and I take you to the hospital? Emond placed a pillow behind me and told me, I saw you staggering when you came back in the evening at the community gate. I felt something was wrong, so I followed you upstairs and found you had fainted at the door. I had someone give you a fever-reducing shot. How are you feeling now? Still uncomfortable? He asked me softly, carefully handing me something. A glass cup with a milky white liquid. It was a warm glass of milk. You didn't eat much tonight, drink some milk to warm your stomach. Livia, he called my name softly, beginning to reprimand me in a familiar tone. You can't take care of yourself at all. If it weren't for me and our son today, no one would have known you fell ill. Livia, come home with us, okay? Let Will and I take care of you. I watched him, feeling a bit uneasy as he said this. And Will, who was nodding his head continuously in agreement by the bed. I smiled a little, reached out and took the glass of milk. The next second, I let go. With a crash, the glass shattered into pieces on the floor. The white milk flowed across the floor. I pointed at the mottled traces and said slowly, Emond, look, the cup is broken and can't be restored. The milk is spilled, and it can't be recovered either. Moreover, after a few minutes, my door was suddenly knocked on, and the sound of many people talking came through. Will went to open the door. A group of people came in noisily. Everyone was carrying a bunch of things, completely surrounding my bed. "Oh, Olivia, how did you get sick? I told you not to get wet that day, but these people insisted on taking you into the rainforest. Livia, are you still feeling bad? I brought you the soft candy you said you liked last time. If the medicine tastes bitter, have one, and you won't feel bad." With everyone talking at once, they finally noticed the presence of the large and small figures in the room. They hesitated and asked, "Who are these two?" I saw Emond and Will's bodies instinctively tense up. So, surrounded by the crowd, I smiled and introduced them to everyone. "Not important, just a friend and his son. We won't see them again, they're leaving soon. After all, he is just a child." Will immediately broke down, standing at the door, crying loudly, shouting, "I don't want to go, I want my mom." His crying was so loud that Toby barked at him a few times. The Walpole family immediately came out from hiding, took the child away, and helped the staggering man out. I too have shared a boat with them. But spilled water cannot be recovered, and the rivers and seas cannot be stopped. Side story 2, Emond Walpole. When Will was 12 years old, he finally mustered the courage to break away from his father, Emond. He said he wanted to find Livia. He didn't understand why such a simple thing could be met with so much resistance from Emond. Will didn't know. Actually, over the years, Emond had visited Livia. The reason he didn't want Will to go was that Livia had remarried and had a very lovely little girl. Emond believed that his marriage with Livia had failed too much. Livia was sensitive and emotionally fragile. To completely move on, it would take her a considerable amount of time. But Emond never expected that Livia was nothing like he imagined. She seemed almost unfamiliar to him. Laughing heartily. Living freely. As if that was truly her essence. Emond suddenly remembered the first time he met Livia. The girl was silent and quiet, sitting across from him, pulled by her mother. At that time, Emond was strictly controlled by his mother, and when he heard he was arranged for a marriage, he was furious. Naturally, he couldn't stand this girl who was 4 years younger and looked utterly dull. In those years, he had countless arguments with his family. Mary Cowie was his college classmate, outgoing and cheerful. After hearing that he didn't want to be controlled by his family in a marriage, she readily agreed to help him out, pretending to be his girlfriend. Later, even his grandfather intervened in his romantic affairs. With no other choice, Emond reluctantly agreed to break up with Mary. At that time, Emond didn't know Mary had feelings for him, and later he felt guilty for using her. After Mary returned to the country, Emond had dinner with her a few times and discussed some collaboration projects. Emond originally thought that this truth would make Livia forgive him. At least he hadn't truly wronged Livia in terms of feelings. He always believed that his mistake was projecting his resentment towards the Walpole family's control onto Livia, thus being indifferent and uncaring toward her. This led to Livia feeling cold and unable to endure any longer, resulting in their divorce. It wasn't until Emond saw Livia's life after marriage that he realized what he had truly missed. Livia married a police officer, whom she met during an accidental road rescue. The police officer was very busy, but he always found time to take Livia out for a walk. To see the mountains, to see the sea. To seek the sources of all life. Whatever happened at work, he would try to tell Livia as soon as possible. He would buy interesting and new things he saw on his way home or take pictures to send to Livia. They shared their lives with each other. They loved each other just the same. Before long, Livia gave birth to a daughter. The daughter loved to run around with her Maltese puppy as she began to learn to speak. As the girl grew a little older, in kindergarten, she would boast to her classmates, "My mommy is awesome. She can do crafts. And she can drive race cars. Do you want to come to my house? I'll introduce you to my mommy." Emond felt like a dark mouse, peering into other people's lives. Sometimes he wanted to step out and greet Livia. He wanted to ask her how she was doing, whether she was eating well. But in the end, he silently withdrew his footsteps. After that, he never inquired about Livia again. One year during the spring festival. After finishing his social obligations, Emond returned alone to his empty home. He tugged at his tie, feeling a bit uncomfortable, and called out, "Livia, I'm a bit thirsty." He thought a warm light would greet him. A cup of warm milk. But all that responded to him was endless darkness and silence. At that moment, overwhelming regret suffocated Emond. His tall figure gradually slid down from the entrance. A painful wail echoed in the darkness. Side Story 2, Will Walpole. The third year of the Cold War between Will and Emond. Finally, Will got his chance. After shaking off his bodyguards, he scoffed disdainfully, "Is this all they've got?" With a face increasingly resembling Emond's, he boarded the high-speed train to South City alone. So, Will casually bought a ticket, and after a transfer, he finally arrived at the neighborhood he had visited before. 10 years had passed. Will didn't know if Livia still lived here. He looked at the walls, now old and peeling compared to his memory, and the refurbished neighborhood gate, and nervously knocked on the door. Knock, knock. With a creak, the door opened. Will looked up expectantly. But it was an unfamiliar face. "Who are you looking for?" "I'm looking for my mom, Livia Hurley." "Don't know her, you got the wrong place." Sure enough, she no longer lived here. Will hung his head dejectedly. After walking a bit out of the neighborhood, he instinctively turned around, looking towards another path leading to the park. The stone-paved path where he once fell. Livia didn't come to pick him up. Will suddenly remembered when he had just started to remember things, he was always wobbling and falling because he had just learned to walk. At that time, Livia wouldn't pick him up either but would encourage him gently. "Will, don't cry, it's nothing to fall, our Will can stand up by himself, right? Mommy believes in you." Then he would hold back his tears, wobble to his feet, and run towards Livia, who was looking at him with eyes full of love. He would throw himself into her arms, be hugged and kissed by her, and hear her say, "Wow, our Will is so great, a little man." Actually, during his childhood, Will really liked Livia. His mom was always gentle, reliable, and patient. But later, under the guidance of his dad, his grandma, and the entire Walpole family, he developed a dislike for Livia. He felt that Livia stayed home every day, had no career of her own, and was just a rich lady who only enjoyed life. He hated Livia controlling him and didn't like her restricting him. Because Livia's views always differed from those of his grandma and dad. But everyone in the family said that grandma's and dad's words were the right ones. So after Livia left, Will always thought he was influenced by others, that he was too young to understand some truths at that time, which made Livia not want him either. Will never thought it was his own problem. Until he saw that little girl. After a fight, her face was dirty like a little cat, but she was still shouting. "Are you convinced? Don't you dare say bad things about my mom again." Will witnessed the whole process. A few little boys had been bad-mouthing the girl's mom, saying she was not proper, always out playing or racing, not at all a good wife and mother. The girl got furious, like a lit firecracker. Without a word, she started fighting. "Your moms are just jealous of my mom. If you're so great, let your moms win a championship too. Ha, you can't live well so you mock others." The girl was eventually taken away by her grandma. Her grandma unhappily scolded her for not being ladylike and always wild, complaining that she was as disobedient as your mom. Just like when Will was young, his grandma would always criticize him, "Don't be like your mom." What did Will think at that time? He thought it was right. He thought his grandma and dad were better than his mom. In his mind, he was a boy who would become his dad's successor. His mother didn't understand anything, so why should he listen to her? So he agreed, he endorsed it. But what did the little girl say? She giggled, not directly blaming her grandma, but clung to her arm and acted cute. "Grandma, don't be mad, I just wanted to do it. Don't always talk about my mom is the best. She even bought you a necklace when she came back the other day." "Really?" "Of course. My mom likes you a lot too." "Well, then Grandma won't say it anymore, I'll listen to my precious granddaughter." Will suddenly felt a wave of sadness. Especially when he saw Livia appear and pick up the little girl. The guidance of a family requires the joint participation of both parents. especially the father's role. A dad's attitude towards the mom determines the child's attitude towards the mom. Emond didn't set a good example for him. And he himself never thought there was anything wrong with that. It was as if he was born lacking an ability to empathize with his own mother. Later, Will's life, like Emond, was dictated by the Walpole family to enter into an arranged marriage. He sat across from the girl, both of them silent. The girl was quiet, gentle, and spoke little. Grandma Walpole liked her very much. Will struggled and resisted, trying countless ways to escape his fate. He even attempted to run away with no money, only to be brought back in disgrace. He asked his father how he had managed back in the day. Emond looked at him without speaking, instead waving his hand for him to leave the study. But just when Will was too exhausted to resist and decided to compromise, Emond suddenly stepped in and cancelled the engagement for him. Will didn't know what Emond had done. But from the expressions on his grandparents' faces, they seemed quite upset. And Emond, since that day, appeared to have been drained of energy, aging significantly in an instant. In less than 5 years, illness consumed his body until the end. Before he passed away, Emond held Will's hand, touching his eyes as if reminiscing, as if reluctant to part. His eyes were the only feature that resembled Livia. Will still couldn't help but want to ask what Emond had done back then to change the Walpole family's attitude. Emond still didn't face him directly but told him, "This was your mother's only request to me back in the day." On the day Will was born, Livia lay weakly on the hospital bed, pleading with Emond. "Emond, can you please not let our child follow our path?" At that time, Emond hadn't taken it to heart. He thought Livia was just reluctant to let Will go. Later, he realized that what Livia had been pleading for all along was freedom, distance, the vastness they had never experienced. The blue sky remained light and breezy. Emond seemed to return to that summer. It felt as if he had never been rescued from the car buried deep in the dirt. In the darkness, the girl's breath brushed against his cheek, calling his name, asking him, "Emond, how are you?" Emond remembered that he had developed a high fever in the middle of the night after his arm was pierced by the car. Due to hypothermia, his lips were dry and parched. In a daze, he seemed to dream that he found a spring. He was sucking it in, feeling relieved. But the water had an inexplicable metallic taste. When he opened his eyes again, he saw the girl's white wrist had been bitten, with fresh bloodstains still visible. Emond quietly looked at her frail face and called her name, "Livia, don't sleep." He told her, "If you sleep, you will truly lose your freedom." Then, amidst the sorrowful cries, Emond's hand slowly fell.